Morning students, welcome to the online class of English. Today we'll be doing a poem from your book Beehive. The title of the poem is A Legend of the Northland. This poem is written by Phoebe Carey. Now Phoebe Carey was an American poetess and the younger sister of poetess Alice Carey. She was born on 4th of September 1822 in Ohio, United States. The sisters co-published poems in 1849 and then each went on to publish volumes of their own. Phoebe Carey passed away on 31st of July 1871 in Newport, Rhode Island, United States. Now, I'll be introducing you all to the poem. A Legend of the Northland is a ballad. A ballad is a poem narrating a story in short stanzas. Ballad is such kind of poem which tells a story in short stanzas, and in the poem all the stanzas comprise 4 lines. There are in all 16 stanzas in this poem, and these stanzas tell us a story. Ballads are a part of folk culture or popular culture and are passed on orally from one generation to the next. Folk culture comprises of traditional stories which are passed on from one generation to the next generation. Now this story is of the Northland area, the area which is near the North Pole. The exact place is not specified, but Northland means the area in the northernmost part of the earth, that is near the North Pole. Legend means a historical story, one which is very old and has been passed on from generation to generation. So students, let's start the poem. I'll be explaining the poem to you after reading out each stanza. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Here the poet introduces the place from which her story is derived, which is the Northland, where the days are short and nights are long in winter. It is so cold in that season that people cannot sleep comfortably the whole night and often wake up. As the nights are very long, they are also not able to sleep the entire night. Away, away in this stanza means very far away. Northland, like I have explained earlier, is a place located in the North Pole. Hours of the day means daylight hours. Cannot sleep them through, in the last line of this stanza means cannot sleep through the entire night. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. Now children harness means to tie. Reindeer is an animal residing in the far north. Sledges mean animal drawn carriage used for transportation over snow. And furry here means made of fur. So when the snow falls, people like to go sledging by tying reindeers to their sledges to pull them. Because of the cold, children wear heavy woolen and fur clothes that cover them up fully and make them look like bear cubs. Stanza 3. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe it's true. and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Curious means strange. Tale is a story. Now, parents in the Northland tell their children a story. Although the poet does not think the story is true, it should be told nonetheless because it teaches children an important lesson. Then the poet begins to tell the story. Once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching just as he did, Now, this story is about Saint Peter as he travelled around the world preaching the word of God. Saint Peter is an apostle of Christ. Preaching means to give sermons. He came to the door of a cottage in travelling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Now, Saint Peter came to a woman's house in the Northland just when she was baking cakes in a fireplace for herself. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Saint Peter's body was pale and tired at the end of a long day during which he had been fasting. To sustain himself, he asked the woman to give him only one of the many cakes that she was baking. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Now, baking lay means the cake was being baked. So the little woman baked a very small cake, but before she could give it to Saint Peter, she started thinking that it was too big to be given away like that. Therefore she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. So this little woman went on to make an even smaller cake, but this also looked as big as the first one to her. Then she took a tiny scrape of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. Tiny scrap of dough here means a very small piece. Dough is the cake mixture. Rolled and rolled, here it is repeated to show that it was rolled very thin. Now, in her third attempt to make a cake so small that she wouldn't mind giving it away, she took an extremely small lump of dough, and when she rolled out the dough, her cake was as flat and thin as a wafer. However, she couldn't even bear to give that small cake away. For she said, "My cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself, and yet too large to give away." So she put them on the shelf. The woman said that the cakes that seemed small when she herself ate them were all too big to be donated for free. As a result, she ended up keeping all the cakes on the shelf and not giving any to Saint Peter. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. Now, Saint Peter grew very angry because he was hungry and weak and needed some food. It is not easy to anger a saint, But the selfish woman had been able to do so. She had tested his patience. And he said, "You are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm." So Saint Peter put a curse on the selfish woman, telling her she did not deserve to have such comforts of human life like a warm fire, a house to live in, and good food to eat whenever she wanted. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. Boring means making holes in tree trunks with the beak to find food like insects. Saint Peter cursed the woman that she would have to build her own nest like birds do, and must dig holes into hard dry wood to get food to feed herself. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. Chimney is a shaft to draw away the smoke from a fireplace. Woodpecker is a bird with a reddish crown on the head which bores trees for food. The woman went up the chimney of a house, being speechless, and had turned into a woodpecker. This woodpecker could be seen fly out of the top of the chimney. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burnt black as a coal in the flame. Scarlet means bright red, black as a coal means jet black. As the woman had been wearing a red cap in human form, as a woodpecker her head was still the same shade of red in color. However, all the clothes she had been wearing seemed to have been burnt and had become black, and that is what the color of the woodpecker's body was. Now this is the last stanza of the poem, and every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. Now wood here is forest. This very day means today. Boring for food means making holes in tree trunks with a beak for finding food. The poet says that every schoolboy living in the village had seen this woodpecker, and that she still digs into the bark of trees looking for worms and insects to feed on. Now literary devices in the poem, students, are given here. Firstly, let us talk about the rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme throughout the poem is ABCB. The poetic device alliteration is used. Alliteration is the repetition of a consonant sound in two or more close words. So here is a list of examples of alliteration from the poem. Next is repetition. Now repetition, students, is any word or sentence which is repeated to lay emphasis on it. So in stanza 1, it is the word away is repeated. In stanza 2, rolled. In stanzas 13 and 16, boring word is repeated. Enjambment. Enjambment is running lines of poetry from one to the next without using any kind of punctuation to indicate a stop. In stanza 1, line 3 and 4 are examples of enjambment. Similarly, in stanza 2, line 1 and 2, line 3 and 4. Then in stanza 3, 4, 10 and 11 also you will find examples of enjambment. The next literary device which is used is simile. Simile is a comparison using as or like. In stanza 2, the children look like bears' cubs. Here the children are compared to bears' cubs. So this is an example of simile. Similarly, in stanza 9, baked it thin as a wafer. Here the cake is compared to a wafer. In stanza 15 of the poem, clothes were burned black as a coal. So the color of the burnt clothes is compared to that of coal. Now all these are examples of simile. Now the central idea of the poem. The poem A Legend of the Northland is a folktale passed down from one generation to another, which teaches us not to be selfish. It is based in Northland, a very cold place, where one Saint Peter came to the door of a little woman who was baking cakes and asked her for a cake as he was feeling very weak due to a fast. Now this woman was selfish and did not even give him a small piece. Saint Peter cursed her and told her that she was not fit to live in human form and food and warmth. He turned her into a woodpecker who has to bore a hole in hard and dry wood to get its scant food. The woman was punished for her greed and selfishness. This brings us to the end of the lesson. So, students, the story, the legend carries a moral, that is, that we should not be selfish or greedy. Instead, we should help the needy. Thank you.